we have been hoping, we've been craving, in fact, opportunities to gather in community throughout our 25th year, which is this year, our 25th anniversary year. And I'll say more on that in just a minute. We're very, very grateful to our hosts for the in-person portion of this event, the Maysles Documentary Center, who came to the rescue for us when our previous venue partner fell through. So big thanks to Kazembe Balagoon and the whole team at Maysles for stepping up and stepping in for us. Thank you to everyone joining us via Firelight's YouTube channel. I know there are a number of people. Hello to everyone at home. We miss you here. Please note that should you like to access live closed captions for this event, you may select the CC icon in the lower right-hand side of your YouTube window to activate closed captions. Thank you to our stalwart technical producer, Geronimo Saldana, back there somewhere, for your support, and to our series producer, Jean-Pierre Regis, Senior Director of Communications, Justin Sherwood, Communications Manager, Patty Marte, for their vision and their dedication to the Beyond Resilience series. We initially started this series back, we started this series back in the pandemic in a moment of crisis, and here we are in another moment of crisis. So thank you, the three of you, for holding the fort. Today's topic, distribution, has struck a nerve with many of us in the documentary field over the last few years. Initially, the crisis in distribution felt like a largely economic issue. Major distributors consolidated, folded, or to use the preferred business term, pivoted. And while the term pivot might pass for a respectable strategy when presenting to shareholders, those of us in the independent documentary world, especially those of us who are people of color, know that pivoting has also meant backing away from commitments to supporting underrepresented people and stories, backing away from documentaries that address urgent social issues, and generally avoiding anything outside the dubious categories of celebrity or true crime. But now, especially considering the events of the past few weeks, we understand that the distribution crisis is actually political in addition. Urgent stories, two of which we'll discuss today as depicted in the films Union and Unseen, are harder to tell because major distributors do not want to run afoul of technology leaders who are increasingly and alarmingly also political leaders. And with the recent arrest and subsequent release of No Other Land co-director Hamdan Bilal, a filmmaker who has his own fascinating distribution story to tell, the politicization of documentary filmmaking and distribution has never been more apparent or concerning. We will not solve many issues with distribution in this room today. However, our moderator, Karin Chien, and the two film teams who join us today will undoubtedly open an aperture on what's possible when teams strategically marry their impact campaigns and distribution plans. To that end, Firelight Media and Distribution Advocates will release a series of case studies this year that will give our communities detailed insights on their path to releasing films, in the hope that others might gain knowledge and tips to use on their own film journeys. Those case studies will be a jumping off point for our discussion today, and we'll make sure to share them widely in the chat below and among our newsletters and Substacks. In closing, I want to thank our ongoing Beyond Resilience series supporters, including the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and the National Endowment for the Arts. A special thank you to distribution advocates, Karen, Amy, Avril, and their team, and their Film Aid Fund for co-presenting this conversation with us. If you haven't checked out their incredible Substack or listened to their very successful podcast on distribution, you should. We'll put information on how to access both in the chat. Lastly, I want to make a special plug for Firelight Media's 25th anniversary, which we're celebrating this year. We kicked off our celebrations at Sundance Film Festival. We look forward to more events and activations this spring, summer, and fall. Please visit our website, firelightmedia.tv, to learn how you can donate to our anniversary fundraising campaign or join events celebrating our legacy. Now to kick off our panel discussion, please welcome Karin Chien.
Thank you so much, Marcia, and to the whole Firelight team for putting this together. I am a Chinese woman with long black hair. I'm wearing glasses, black top and a black jacket with black pants, very New York, with white stripes. And I'm very happy to be here. I know that they're doing bios, I think, online, and it's in the event description, so we're going to get straight to it. I wanted to just say a little bit about Distribution Advocates, which is co-presenting this event. We have launched recently in the last 6 months a fund called Film Aid, and that fund is led brilliantly day to day by Amy Hobby on behalf of Distribution Advocates. And about 6 months ago, we granted 5 releases, innovation grants. There's a rolling submission, so anybody listening, please take a look at the site and think about applying. And a huge part of that program is to share back learnings. It's really to look for things that are working and also understand what's not working. And so that requires a really radical transparency. And you'll see that in the case studies that we've published. And there's so much data and so much information on there. We know that they've started to become part of school curriculums as well. But we hope to kind of see that practice of sharing. So I'm so grateful to the film teams who are here today to share with us. So thank you for being here. And just a thank you to our funders who have stood by us, Perspective Fund, Ford Foundation, and also Lin Lei for backing what we're doing here. Okay, so I'm gonna get into it. And I want to say that there are so many unique differences, but also so many similarities to what I saw between your 2 case studies. And thank you for the labor and the energy it took to even put those case studies together in the way that you did. I want to talk about the kind of most interesting thing that I saw as soon as I started reading it, is that you both chose a split rights strategy. And that is still kind of a new thing for filmmakers to consider, as opposed to an all rights deal. And just to give a little context, all rights deals were very common for a long time because it was usually the only way you could get a theatrical release, because so much money was spent marketing theatrical releases to get people to come to the theaters that distributors would need your other rights in order to make back those losses. So it's still a new thing for filmmakers to think about going out on their theatricals separately from the other rights, but it is the way for filmmakers to kind of have the most control and the most creative authority. And the thing that I noticed about the distribution choices and the strategy that both of your releases took is that you made choices driven by the values of your film. And that is something you couldn't do, for example, if you turned over all your rights to a distribution partner. So that I found that really striking, how integrated that was with your release plans. So maybe I'll start with Set, since you're sitting right next to me. I want to say, first of all, congratulations on all the different deals. You know, there's at least 5 different rights deals, broadcast and educational, which are more traditional, but also really interesting in-flight audio rights, and then a community non-theatrical strategy. Can you talk a bit about how you managed all these different rights deals? Did you have people helping you negotiate the terms? And especially, can you say more about the 100 community screening program?
Thank you so much, Karin and Firelight. My name is Set. I use they, them pronouns. I have a round face, black hair, black beard, black rim glasses, and I'm wearing a sweater that says Watermelon Pictures and a dark brown pants. And I should say full disclosure, Firelight has been like a big supporter of Unseen from the very beginning, and one of the most invaluable support that we received in the final half of the Doc Lab was that I got paired up with Karin Chien and also with Carlos Gutierrez as mentors when we were doing distribution. So I should say it's kind of um like just there's like we're very privileged that we have such incredible mentors, to have supported us in the journey of the distribution of our project. And relatedly to the point of split rights, I should say also Unseen is the first feature that I made. It took us 7 years, 8 years to make it. And I think as a first-time filmmaker, I should also name our film didn't get into Sundance. We did not get into Tribeca. We didn't get into South by Southwest. And 2 years in, like our film premiered in May 2023. It's like almost in 2 months. It's gonna be May 2025, and the distribution journey of our film hasn't actually ended yet. Like all the way to the end of the year, I can imagine. Like there's like all these things that our film continues to be engaged in, and I'm just saying that because I hope that for especially first-time filmmakers, or even if you're not a first-time filmmakers, um, I feel like we put all of our eggs in the basket that gatekeepers keep. And how do we, make like how to make an omelet, boil? Oh, it's also a hard time to use egg analogy because eggs are so expensive right now. I'm sorry. Um, but to your point about the splitting rights, a lot of I think the journey of our film is really based on relationships. The first person that really supported our project were Nicole Chen and Nikki Heyman and Justine Nagan when they were also at POV, and also Chloe Bai. And the reason that POV heard about our project is because actually we got rejected to a thing that we were applying for. But then in that rejection process, they were like, "Oh, I remember your project. Let's talk later." That later took 2 years, but we still talked. And from that seed of a relationship, our film ended up being kind of like tracked by the POV team that allowed us to have the broadcast that we ended up having last year. And with the the podcast version of our film, I think something that I'm really proud about with the journey of our film is how we centered the community that we really feel is the core audience that we're speaking to, namely undocumented immigrants and blind slash disabled audiences that people don't ever think about as primary audiences for film. And from the very beginning, we wanted to make sure that the film is as accessible as possible to different communities, and that included creating an audio play, like a podcast version of the film. And it was actually through Lucy Mukherjee at Firelight that I got introduced to another person who does podcasts, and that person introduced me to somebody else that ended up giving us the opportunity to find distribution for the audio streaming platform for our project. Um, and I think like the other thing that I'm just reflecting on also, particularly the in-flight distribution that we had. The reason I got connected to that distributor is because I was listening to a panel like literally almost a year ago at the IDA Getting Real conference, and I think his name's Keith Wilson. He produced I Didn't See You There by Reed Davenport, and I heard him talk about the in-flight distribution for their film, and I googled who that distributor was, and I just sent a cold email. And from that cold email, they were like, "We're gonna take you," and I was like, "What?" All this to say, I feel like how do we stay curious and open about all the possibilities and not leaving any stone unturned, and the importance of community, because I should also say there's so much expectation I feel that indie filmmakers could put on themselves to do all the things. And I think I just blurted out a lot of different names because it's community that really allows us to get our film to the next level, and allowing ourselves to trust a larger network of people that if your film is there's an audience that's looking out for it, like trust that process and don't let some people's no's translate into your head as a no from everybody, because there are the yeses out there and we have to really look for them.
I just want to say, first of all, as an advisor, I never advise any of that. Like, that was just so, like, to me, it's revolutionary what you said, because it is a very different way of approaching distribution than the business or transactional side of it, where there's a strategy that's created and then it's executed and implemented, like by inserting that kind of very radical trust into this process and then having these deals and the relationships that support the film. I just find that revolutionary. So thank you for sharing that, Set. And, with Union, there's so much to talk about, and I'm going to focus first on this because it was really interesting to me that and it's also the thing that the Distribution Advocates Film Aid Fund wanted to put some money behind for you guys to explore, and that's about your TVOD release, right? TVOD being transactional VOD. And in your case study, you say, and I'll just quote it, during our initial 5-day TVOD release, we netted as much money in film rentals as we did in our entire theatrical run for less money, time, and resources. So this is also kind of radical and interesting because TVOD in general is declining in the distribution space. It's something that distributors talk about, that the TVOD income is decreasing, but you guys reverse that trend. And it's through a very, I think, creative and innovative choice of launching that around Black Friday and using that, right, as the marketing. So I just wonder if you can talk more about that success.
Sure. I'll just introduce myself to start. So my name is Mars. I'm the producer of Union. I am a multiracial, Black, white, androgynous kind of looking person. I like a slick back bun going on. I have a white button-up shirt, some gold hoops, some black pants. That's what we'll say for now. I'll let Steve.
Oh, yeah. Hi. Thank you so much for having us. I'm Steve Maing, one of the directors of Union. I am a Korean male, also wearing all black, with glasses, longish hair, and such a pleasure and honor to be here. Glad you all have convened such a brilliant bunch of people to try and solve this distribution crisis.
So like you said, there's so much to talk about with Union's release, and we can go on and on and on, but I like that you focused it on one part. So for TVOD, I'll mention the platform that we went with is called Gather. There are a couple of other similar platforms, Kinema, Jolt. These are all basically technology platforms. They're not actually distributors. And so kind of the distinction there is that it's not like you go to those websites and you search through their libraries and you find films. It's more so they are providing you with certain tools and ways in which you can reach an audience directly. And then you build those tools into your own website, your own social media, right, et cetera. And so I guess the other thing I want to clarify is they're not really designed, at least for the time being, for a viewer to, easily kind of interface with and find your film. You have to do work as the filmmaker, as your own self-distributor, to kind of understand, okay, how am I using this technology as an intermediary to connect with, viewers and get them to my film. So the reason we chose Gather amongst these other platforms, and I'd also recommend when you're making these choices to meet with the platforms, to talk to other filmmakers who have used them, to have like very straight off the record conversations. I think that kind of transparency is so necessary. And your film, there might be different features that are like better on one platform versus another. So for us, for Gather, we really liked how much data you have access to. We found that to be really exciting, really useful. And then there were certain features that they have that really excited us as far as our impact goals for the film. So one that I'll shout out is called Partner TVOD. And basically what that means is that, if we are partnering with a union or some other kind of organization, they get an affiliate link. And so when they share their link, whoever watches, that link or rents the film from that link, they get a share of those profits. And so we thought that was so cool because not only are we building partnerships, it's helping us reach a wider audience, but also those partners are, financially benefiting from sharing the film, and you're kind of like building the labor movement as you're sharing this film about it. So that was really exciting to us. And so we wanted to be, it was originally set up as a 5-day limited window that kicked off on Black Friday. And, in the case study, we say more about this, but the reason we did that was just to attach it to something, bigger than the film and kind of like create a marketing narrative. And so on Black Friday, there were global strikes on Amazon. And so our marketing slogan was, this Black Friday, don't shop at Amazon, rent Union instead, which was like really catchy and whatever makes people feel good and all that kind of good stuff. What else do I want to say? So we did the 5-day window, and then we ended up extending it through the end of January, so for 2 months total. Part of the reason that we did that, which we can talk more on later, was we became aware that Amazon workers, and specifically the ones in our film, were going to go on strike in December. And so we realized, it would not make sense to make the film inaccessible again. We want it to be accessible, through when they're on strike, obviously. So we lasted, that window closed in January, and then we'll open it back up in May. We'll be on Gather again, and also kind of like the usual suspect TVOD platforms like iTunes, et cetera, et cetera. What else? What else would we say about Gather?
I think you hit it, Mars. I think the customizable experience was kind of incredible. This is the spirit of what happens, right? Like when you are rendered, commercially invisible, right? The upshot is that actually we're getting control back. And that's a really empowering moment because we're hitting the hard reset. We can make values-based decisions around how we want to distribute our films now, actually. Things you wouldn't get, right, with an all rights deal, of like just 5 years ago where you wouldn't be even allowed like community rights to do a free screening with your constituents or participants even, right? Like what a incredibly kind of dystopic vision of documentary distribution where filmmakers aren't allowed to do basic things that are important to their mission. And so, like Mars was talking about, we were able to really structure our release and think deeply about what are the benchmarks we care about, who are the communities we care about. And every release was tied back to one of these ideas about what was the essential, point and mission of making this film to begin with. And that was a really exciting and invigorating model, actually, that, wasn't simply about this idea of impact or this, social do-gooding. That was an important thing. It also generated revenue at times in ways that really surprised us. So I think, this overarching idea that, getting back control actually is empowering financially and also ethically was, maybe the headline for us.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, as from my point of view, I do feel like your work and your creativity and the energy you bring to it are redefining, and even just the way you reframed the lack of control. Like that was the prize. Like it used to be framed as the prize to just give your film over to a distributor, but having it reframed and also just what distribution can mean, redefined, and that relationship with your audience and the communities and all of that, I think is really key. So on like to just pull back a little bit and talk about how hard this work is, right? And the labor of it, and the time commitment and all of that. I do want to ask both of your releases, because in your case studies, you point to the either systemic change that you had to undertake on behalf of your films or that you're confronting during the release of them. And not to say that we're going to solve those problems or, find the answers, but I think it would just be helpful to hear, you guys talk a bit about that. And I'm going to start with you, Seth, because your case study points to a really specific example during the process of finishing your film or, getting the rest of the funding for the post-production. And you talk about a very long period that you had to pause and really advocate for your film and your film team, to get, and I'll just read this, that in your case study, you say that you had to get grant makers to remove requirements for some of their grants, and that was necessary for you to continue fundraising for the whole film, to be used for both the production and the impact campaign. Can you talk about what that was and also how that process worked for you, and if you feel like that change is now something that we can move forward from, or there's still more work and advocacy needed?
For sure. Thank you so much, Karen. Well, I shouldn't name that I'm an undocumented immigrant, and I've been openly undocumented since I was a teenager. And I know, like, especially in this time in the world, it's like not an easy thing to be open about, but it's kind of difficult. I think it's harder to go back into the shadow once you experience what the light could taste like. And I feel like I also should name that I'm standing on the shoulders of so many giants, undocumented artists and filmmakers before me, that have been trying to create cultural work to reach and speak to undocumented audiences, but have been systemically excluded. People like Julio Salgado, Jesus Iniguez, Kat Evasco, Dreamers Adrift, Undeportables Production, Tamtran. And the only reason that I feel like we were able to get to a further stage with the work that we were doing with the Undocumented Filmmakers Collective is because, we're part of a legacy of people that don't want our stories to get erased. And I think that's what Firelight also even stands for, William Greaves, like just all these folks before us. And the unfortunate reality, I feel like, for certain communities of filmmakers, we kind of have to advocate for ourselves to get to the point where we can make our film. The reason it took our film 7 years, 8 years to get made is because the first 5 years, I couldn't even open some application portals because the moment I open it, it asked me whether I'm a citizen or not. So they don't even review my application. They just tell me from the get-go, don't apply, don't waste your time because you're not eligible. And I feel like similarly, because our film deals with disability, also the work of Forward Doc has also been really integral in changing the landscape of how filmmakers with disabilities are paving a path for themselves instead of other people telling us how we should think about our own narratives and our own communities. And to what I was saying earlier, the importance of community, like it's so hard to even conceive the idea of just making things all by ourselves. And the moment we recognize the importance of leaning on each other as a community, I feel like when we organize ourselves in that way, we become unstoppable. And as much as the current state of the world tries to push us back again, I feel like there's fear there for sure. But I feel like our stories are gonna get out there no matter what. And especially in these times, it's the moment to do that.
Thank you so much, Seth. And with Union, your case study points to really fundamental issues at the core of kind of these financing models. I wonder, can I ask how you and your funders talk about or confront this kind of fissure, right? That a film about labor can only be seen with a significant amount of unpaid labor, right? Like it's reading your case study, that was very front and center for me. And can you talk about what it would have taken to be unpaid? Because I did see, and and you tell me if this is right or wrong, but there's almost an analogy between the way that documentary films, is it still working? No. Okay. Now it's back. Okay. So I almost saw a way, how documentary films are, you raise money as you go, and then you're deferring all your fees until the end because you never have enough money to keep up with your work. And it almost read like your distribution release was similar, right? You raised as much as you could and then deferred your fees and kept going. But I'm curious how do you talk about that internally?
Definitely. I think for one thing, we were in a pretty unique position of it during production. We were able to compensate ourselves, and like in the moment, which I think is really, really rare and, kind of unacceptable that happens so much with independent documentaries. So in that case, we were quite lucky, and that was kind of like a rare and unique experience, right? When we got to making plans for self-distribution, I think it's partly issues with, ways in which there can and should be more financing to support impact and distribution, like specifically, but also ways in which I think we made some miscalculations around making plans that were too ambitious and not having, not creating the spaces in which we could pause or realize, okay, we don't have enough funding to pay ourselves, let's pause. Our plans were kind of built so that it's like, okay, once they're in motion, we kind of just have to do them, which I do not recommend. But so yeah, to kind of explain that a bit more, we, did awards, we did theatrical, we did this limited TVOD run, and an impact campaign all at once. That was crazy. And so it reached, and the reason we did that was because we were so passionate about people need to see, we were just like, we will not let this film go unseen, and we feel it's urgent and we want to get it out there. In retrospect, I think we could have paced ourselves and made sure that there was the funding in place to pay ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, so we made the plans to do all of this simultaneously and have these different forms of distribution intertwined, right? So like our impact campaign goals were very much part of the theatrical run, very much part of TVOD, et cetera. I think the reason that we were so ambitious was because we had relationships with our production funders that made us feel confident, like, okay, awards and certain aspects of this will be covered by, we had success in fundraising from those entities, and those relationships, continued, and we're so grateful for that support, right? I think the miscalculation, and something that I would just be curious how other filmmakers attend to this, is looking for funders outside of the industry. So kind of like non-traditional funders. And that's where we thought, okay, for our impact campaign, we saw a lot of potential with, various funders or like people in the labor movement that would support something like this. I still think that's possible. And also something I want to clarify is I sort of see us in the midst of our release still. Like you said, it's sort of like, it's a very long life. So I still see potential in pursuing those funding sources. But I think for us, there was a timing issue of, because we were releasing in an election year, a lot of those funders were totally focused on the election, and either just capacity wise, or they had used up their budgets for, election work. And so that means that we were, kind of anticipating that and relying on that. And so that didn't come through. And that's when it led to certain choices like, okay, what are the aspects of this campaign that if we don't have the funds for it, what, if we only have limited funding, what can we still do or not do? And so, in the midst of our theatrical run, we sort of had to take a step back with like our social media manager and our digital marketing with our impact producers, and then it meant that, like, and again, this is a very bad habit that filmmakers make, is our core team, right? We were like, okay, those fees we can defer, other fees we can't. So that was kind of the amalgam of things that led to that happening. And I would just say in retrospect, I think that can be avoided by, having more financing that supports this stage of the process, but also just building plans where, you can pace yourself, where you're not doing everything at once, where if you don't have the funding in place, you can stop, and it's, you know what I mean? So I think that was one of the, kind of like how I would describe that issue. I don't know if you would add anything.
Happy to, unless you wanted to.
No, I appreciate that honesty. I think that the only way we're going to figure this out, right, is helping each other and being honest about it. And it's a very common struggle. And maybe I'll just add on to that question, and Steve, feel free to answer either, which is, you know, that leads me to think about like, what were the greatest difference makers in your campaign, right? You just talked about that some of the things you had to cut back on. So my first question, like the first thing I think about is, oh, how did you make those decisions, right? You must have been receiving data that showed you what was working and what was making a difference. And in the union case study, for example, there's a timeline, which is so helpful. And there are some things that film teams are often told to get, like a New York Film Festival premiere, very high profile EP, you know, hiring publicists who are at the top of their game. And so I'm curious about, did those make a difference? You also talk about a modest budget for social ads. And that's something, you know, these are all things I think that every film team is thinking about. Like, if we have a little bit of money, what should we put it towards?
You know, one really instrumental moment was actually a piece of philanthropic funding that came in by way of my sister-in-law in DC, and it was a series of connections that led us to, you know, lo and behold, a billionaire that wanted to support causes like this. And I think that you know, there's something that we as artists and filmmakers are grateful for when somebody swoops in like that, but then also something so troubling when we have to kind of like seek to be in proximity of the money of billionaire philanthropists. You know, this is a problem in politics. This is a problem in now the arts and social documentary practice. And what are the sort of compromises that we make when we are seeking that money, and how do we rewrite our grants for our proposals? And I mean, there's this larger question, I think, that this experience has really opened my eyes about, just, which is like, you know, we're not trying to prove our worth to them. We're also not trying to prove our revenue stream worth to the distributors. I think we have to kind of like reclaim what the valuation of this is, right? This is about like this idea of alienation and capitalism. Like, we have to remind the world that like all of these digital streamers, right? These are tech companies also. So they don't want to just kind of suck up to this administration by avoiding certain kinds of content. They're also seeking other kinds of business that need the buy-in of people holding the levers of power. And so if we play to their set of criteria, it's a huge problem. And so I think it's really an exciting moment that so many people are really trying to think hard about what it is that we need to actually put forward. You know, that there's a tremendous cultural value when you make socially, politically conscious, thoughtful work that doesn't indoctrinate people, but it asks them to think critically about the kind of world they want to live in, the humanity that with which they live by. And I think that this is a real, you know, like a real trying, testing moment for all filmmakers in the nonfiction space to kind of ask this question, like, yes, like, let's demonstrate, because there are revenue streams. It's been really exciting to actually find that, you know, by, you know, again, like taking back control of how we design a release, but then also shifting the narrative entirely, that this is not about proving one way or another, like what our financial value is, you know, because, you know, the one singularly most amazing thing about PBS is that it was not about just, you know, commercially viable projects, but that they were thinking, thoughtful people programming content that just society at large should see across a political demographic spectrum. And yet here we are in a moment where people are trying to politicize that kind of thinking and approach to film distribution. It's disgusting.
Period. I would, on the part of the question about like timeline or specific events that made a difference, I guess I would say it's sort of interesting because a lot of those like high prestige moments, there actually isn't data. Like, there was no way of knowing of like, did getting a big EP, you know, besides, you know, I don't know, like direct communication that we got, it's hard to know if what difference that made in reaching like a wider audience. So I would actually say for us, the two events that we clearly saw greater interest and, like rental numbers went up were again Black Friday and then these Amazon strikes, because it was very easy to connect our film to those events to make people outside of the industry care, and to offer. It's like there is a political event happening and here's a film that's related to that, and then also again by supporting this film it's financially supporting the movement itself. So I would say, though, tying our film to those two things was really useful, or like showed the most difference. And then I guess as far as like, what to prioritize in budgeting, I think digital ads go a long way because they're so low effort and so you can get like extremely geographically specific, right? So if you're playing in theaters in a certain city, you just put, it's so easy to just make those changes and so little on your part. So I think that goes a long way. What else? Do you have anything for that? I don't know. I'll say, shout out digital ads.
Your marketing budget's huge.
Yeah.
No, that's super helpful to hear. I think part of it is like just having data to combat the myths or the, maybe very human desire towards status and prestige, right? Which is a very emotional thing. So can I ask you the same question? Can you talk about, you talked a lot about relationships and how that made a huge impact on your, whole strategy. Were there events, or other influences or other factors that you can contribute to impacting your revenue or impacting your kind of audience engagement?
Unfortunately, my response goes back again to relationships, and I think that's the whole core of like everything I'm gonna say, because we actually had a hard time around like getting like certain kinds of like media outlets and publicity around our film. And I want to give a shout out to like David Magdale, who's like my papa bear of sorts, like who's like such a big advocate, and also Diane Kwan, our executive producer, for Unseen in all the ways that they could. What I'm realizing though is that sometimes in the absence of certain kinds of like, we never got like New York Times critic picks or anything of those, like prestige outlets. But like I said earlier, like we're really proud of how our film still continue. Like it's shocking, actually. Even I am shocked every day that I think about it. Because we didn't do any of the things that the industry tells that you should do to make revenue and to have a longevity for your project. And it reminds me of the opening quote in the book, The God of Small Things. It says, "Never again shall a story be told as though it were the only one." And I feel like this case study, like conversation, is really about that. And I'm saying relationships because in the absence of these prestige outlets for Unseen, what I'm realizing is that the moment you reach someone who's a trusted spokesperson in a certain community, they kind of pull the rest of the community to buy into your project. And I want to give a shout out to our two like core impact producers, Kudsia Naki, Conchita Hernandez Legoreta, and also Anna Portnoy Brimmer. Kudsia and Conchita in particular were instrumental in bringing our film to the blind community and the disabled community. What I'm realizing is that so many films about blindness in particular, and I learned this also from the protagonist of our film, Pedro, who talks about so many films about disability and blindness are about like the anatomical experience of these things. No one talks to the community as like on a human level, and you just happen to have a disability. It's the same for undocumented people. Like so many films about us is about our trauma, our fear of deportation, laws that affect our lives, which is actually a big reason why we are having a hard time finding distribution in other countries. But when we reach undocumented audiences and speak to them, not just as undocumented people, but actually as like full human beings who feel things, and speaking to them in a poetic level, I feel like knowing who your audience is and not, it's kind of like also what Mars was saying earlier, like they knew what message the people that they're trying to reach, needs at that certain time. And I feel like similarly for us, especially right now, it actually is also interesting hearing about what Mars was saying about digital ads, because in the we have a few impact events. We actually couldn't even get our digital ads lifted up because the moment we put undocumented in there, it gets flagged on everything Meta. So it's almost like we couldn't do like regular publicity, we couldn't do digital ads. So relationship, unfortunately, or actually fortunately, is like what saved the day for us, and leaning on the collaborators and the impact producers that we are working with.
I was gonna just to add to that, I think that it we're at a weird moment where we wanna take hold, like whatever tools are in power to use those to our benefit for these types of films. But you're totally right, like that is a risk of relying on something like digital ads, is that it's like the people who control that. Like that's we're not in control of that at the end of the day. So yeah, it is a risk to do that kind of thing. And then you're right that what is always there is partnerships, is relationships, is community. Like that's what's always there. That's what's always reliable.
Yeah, I think that's so important to think about and to say. I mean, and I'll just ask one last question, and then we'll go to the audience questions. So to me, from my point of view, when I look at the innovations that your release has achieved, they're driven by your desire to reach your audiences, your core audiences, right? And with Set, that for one form of that is turning your film into a podcast. Like, it's so innovative, it's so interesting, and it's because you had to do it. You wanted to reach that audience, right? And with Union, I think you guys said it really well in the case study. Like, your film is about labor and it's for workers, which is kind of everyone who's going to watch your film. So that overlap between kind of your distribution audience goals and your impact goals is huge for a film like yours. And that also led to kind of the most innovative successes you had with the TVOD, which really reverses an industry trend, right? Like, it's so fascinating. So I'm going to ask this last question because this is something that is on a lot of film teams' minds. Like, when I asked you what are some of the factors that contributed to your successes, you didn't say the awards campaign, right? And can you talk about your decisions to undertake or not undertake an awards campaign? Especially without a distributor, whatever you guys would like to say.
I can start. I think for us, we pursued awards because of there was such a dissonance of, again, being so passionate about the story, feeling like everyone needed to be able to see it, and yet feeling so, almost censored, or just like, no, like, why is it so hard to get this film out there? And so, as is the pattern with our film and our team, we were like, let's do everything. And so in order to reach big audiences, to make our film undeniable, to make our film, everywhere, like, just to put it everywhere, we deployed all these different strategies. Impact, just reaching a general audience, but also awards, for as much as we can critique like the awards industrial complex, which, like, yes, let's please critique it. Awards still hold like a cultural cachet amongst the industry and amongst distributors who we were still trying to, woo to a certain extent. So it's sort of like we're trying every possible strategy because we want this film to get seen. And again, we're being ambitious because we're like, we think we have the ability to do this like 5-part, release campaign. However, it was really important to us to like not just pursue awards and to intertwine those efforts with the impact campaign, with reaching just like a public, just like a general audience. And so in all the ways that we could, we tried to approach awards in a way where we were doubling up. So it's like, okay, if we're doing a certain screening and, Academy voters are being invited to it, it's still a public screening. It's still like there's a union partnering on it. We're like doing all these other elements of it. And so as much as we could, we tried to not, just do things that were devoted to awards, but it's hard. There were a lot of times in which you can't avoid that. So I guess I would say that it was all in the service of building just keeping us as much in the conversation as possible. And I think, in retrospect, I feel good about having made that decision, because I think all the ways in which, like, everything along the awards campaign kept us in the media. We got, a lot of great press. I also think it just uplifted this phenomenon of political social justice documentaries who are who are having all these distribution struggles. Like, I think the ways in which a lot of press coverage included what No Other Land was going through and like other similar experiences. I think that, that mattered and that was important regardless of awards or not. So it felt worth it to pursue it.
I mean, just quickly that, the unfortunate thing about the awards landscape is also that it's like a pay-to-play environment. So if you don't have a distributor, you don't get to attend certain events. You don't get you can't buy like a $25,000 table or whatever it costs. I'm just making that up. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less, probably more. And so, there's a tremendous imbalance there. But yeah, I mean, we sought it out to kind of disprove the metrics of like, the streamer algorithms saying that political cinema or whatever, cinema verite, whatever it may be, that they don't want to admit is attractive about films like ours is untrue, because the thing that we're setting out to do, to your earlier point, is that like connect with our target audience, which is like people. It's not just, workers or activists, but just people who support the basic core humanity of these projects and the critical thinking that it inspires in people. One thing I just want to plug is that like, I feel like, there used to be this sense that making the film, like this was years, 4 years in the making. Oh, I just want to shout out, Sam Curley, our producer, who wrote the case study, should be up here with us, but couldn't join us here. She is on the West Coast. And we're so lucky to have this incredible producing team with Sam and Mars, who in a lot of ways kind of like helped us arrive, even survive through what is a dramatically changed landscape. It used to be the thinking that, you hit the halfway mark when you finish the film. This was an incredibly hard film to make, like 300 shooting days, tremendous number of months editing, and 4 years in total to create. And then the second half of the 50 yards was finding a home for it to distribute. Now we live in a moment where filmmakers have to start from day one and do kind of a distribution assessment as part of pre-production in order to even imagine a moment where you can actually, have a film that could be seen by people. And these films will be seen by people, but the work is on us now because we have an antagonistic distribution kind of challenge ahead of us that is corporatized and exists in the tech dystopia. So anyway, just to that earlier point, yes.
Helpful. I think I just want to add also like just kind of complicating like the idea of impact. As someone who's been a community organizer for a long time also, unfortunately, I feel like a lot of mainstream nonprofit advocacy organizations also kind of like buy into the awards world, so the moment you get a certain kind of stamp of approval from a certain industry, like it kind of trickles, to the way other people perceive your project also. So I think even like the impact world isn't all necessarily just always like like values align necessarily, so I think there's something that needs to be said about that. And I feel like with as a first this being the first feature that I made, I talked to a lot of friends who are also first time filmmakers, and like a lot of them are saying like, oh, I didn't know that there was a deadline to submit to a certain thing. Everyone assumes that every award is just like you kind of get discovered, that's what I learned a lot from a lot of my first time filmmaker friends, and when we were releasing our films together. And I feel like how can we find ways to, like, just adding on to what Mars and Steve have mentioned, like how can we find ways to lift up our stories and find our audiences beyond the way that this industry has acculturated us to think is the only way.
We're going to start with a question from the room, if there is one. If you'd like to shout it out, raise your hand. If not, there are many from the chat. Yeah.
it really strikes me that for both of these films, a lot of us for a long time have been discouraged by a typical line, I'd say among funders and distributors, that the stories are niche, that the stories, and it's kind of said with derision, well, you're speaking to the choir, right? There's something, as if there's something wrong with that. But one of the things that strikes me about both of these examples is that if you dig into your core audience, there's actually a revenue play for a filmmaker. So rather than thinking you're not hitting you're not being impactful, you're not being effective unless you kind of reach beyond what they think is the constituency for your film, that they also think is a narrow film. But actually, if you do that, that can actually be to the betterment of the filmmaker. It actually can be, right? That's what I heard. I just want to make sure I'm actually hearing that right.
I mean, what that sparks for me is like, I don't know, the mainstream streamers, I don't understand, like, that is not working because people, regular people cannot find films that they like. You know what I mean? Like, it's like mind-boggling that that's the situation we're in which if you can afford it, which most people can't, you have like 12 subscriptions to like, and it's like Disney, like, it's, you know what I mean? It makes no sense. And that, sorry. And then you can't even find the content you want. And so, and yet that's seen as like the glory that we're all aiming for. And so I think, yeah, what I hear you saying is that it's like, if you just reach your niche audience, which usually isn't that niche, but you're directly reaching them and people can find your film, no one cares if it's on Netflix, on wherever. Like, if you think of like Facebook uncles, they just want they're just like, here's how I watched it and now I get to watch it. Great, like they're happy. So I think it's like, being able to define, identify, and reach your audience directly, even if it's a small niche audience according to whoever, I think that's so much more impactful and successful than these like tons of content that's never actually, even with algorithms or whatever, is not effectively reaching audiences.
Just adding to that, the Center for Media and Social Impact is actually releasing an audience study about Unseen in a couple of months. And one of the data points that they're naming is that when they surveyed disabled audiences that have watched Unseen, people that are non-disabled underestimate how much disabled audiences are a big audience for cinema. And even in that perspective, like people assume that disabled audiences is not a thing, and that what I've also learned from Unseen is like some of the people that have given so much, even financially, to our who have been so open to buying the film actually are like blind audience members, and underestimating not to put things necessarily just through the lens of economic terms, but how disabled people also are professionals that have an income and they want to buy things, and if you're underserving them, like there's a big gap that's kind of like missing there, that we can like lift up. And same way for undocumented people, like this whole country always talks about the economic output of undocumented people. We're also consumers of media, and there's a big, like, the more we recognize who our audiences are, I think it's also like really been helpful to know that for Unseen, we weren't necessarily speaking to the choir because it seems like no one has spoken to the choir the way that we were speaking to them before also. And I feel like these moments of like thinking about the moment and our audiences in a different way has been really helpful because there's a big opportunity that a lot of people are missing out on. So they're lost.
We have time for one more? Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. And so this is from Joanne online, and it really kind of about whether there's a collective model here right? Is there any kind of model of filmmakers grouping together to get funding resources rather than being in competition with each other? Don't know if there's an answer, but that's a great question.
Like, I love that idea. I don't know. I mean, my immediate response to that is I love that idea and let's build towards that. But also, I feel like filmmakers are asked to problem solve for so many things. Like, it's like we're being asked to problem solve for so many things on top of just like making our films. And so for an idea like that, I just feel like there are many people in the indie documentary ecosystem who could facilitate, like that should happen, but it's just hard to, I don't know, like putting that pressures on filmmakers to also create whatever that is, I think is not fair. But I love that idea. Yeah.
And just adding on to what I heard one of the co-founders of Marginal, Sanjay Sharma, was talking about like making a stable income and making a living. It's something that independent filmmakers think about. But actually, it's what everybody thinks about all the time. It's just that there's there's policy decisions that don't just affect filmmakers, but everybody. So how can we think about the situation that we're in, especially around like being working class people? Because many filmmakers are working class. How do we stand in solidarity, lifting up the message of union? Like with each other, and not just divide ourselves by sector, but really thinking about that in a larger way.
So nourishing this conversation, I want to express immense gratitude to the three of you for three things. One, for making your beautiful films. Two, for releasing them. And three, even more so, for just being so open and sharing back to the field what you've learned along the way. Like, it's just so immensely helpful. I can't say. So thank you. And thank you to Firelight, to Distribution Advocates, which I'm a part of, especially to Amy. Thank you for having the space for us.
Thank you.